I used to have a friend who lived on Zionism Street in Jerusalem. I remember the bus winding down the streets: Rehov Uruguay, Rehov Guatemala, Rehov Iceland, Finland, Mexico, Brazil. This neighborhood streets are named for the countries that voted for the dramatic United Nations vote on November 29, 1947, in which a majority of countries agreed that a Jewish state should exist in the land of Israel and the British should leave. Here are some sound bites.
Partition of Palestine ends 7 months of deliberation by the United Nations and 2,000 years of political homelessness for the Jews. Tense vote on this way of settling immemorial strife between Jews and Arabs of the Holy Land is preceded by bitter debate. But for once, Russia's Andrei Gromyko sides with the United States. The Arab delegates declare a boycott as the final roll call has begun.
Afghanistan, no. Argentina, abstention. Soviet Union, yes. United Kingdom, abstain. The United States, yes.
And this was the scene next day in Jerusalem. The Jewish people at once began to celebrate the United Nations decision. If they hadn't got all they wanted, they had at least gained the verdict for the setting up of a new Jewish state. The Arab reaction was to follow. 2 days later, this was the typical scene. Arabs advancing on the center of Jerusalem at the beginning of a 3-day strike and an orgy of wrecking, looting and bloodshed. Quickly led to the burning of Jewish shops and the general destruction of Jewish property. Meanwhile, Britain announces the ending of her mandate next May.
So, while it wasn't perfect, the UN resolution was seen as a success for the Zionist movement. In 1951, Israel observed UN Day, and streets in Israel's 3 largest cities were called Rehov HaUmot HaMeuchadot, shortened as Rehov HaUm, or UN Street. But today, they have been renamed Rehov HaZionut, Zionism Street. Here is Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek in 1975 as he removes the sign with UN Street, throws it to the ground, and replaces it with Zionism Street. The crowd in the background are reciting, Anachnu Zioni, we are Zionists.
כל אחד מכם שהוא רק קצת יותר מבוגר צריך להתחיל לעבוד במדינה הזאת במקום לשבות.
This was in response to the United Nations resolution declaring Zionism to be a form of racism. One of the countries that voted yes to Jewish sovereignty back in 1947 was Russia, then the main nation in the Soviet Union. They immediately recognized Israel when it declared independence a year later. But it was the Soviets who helped push through the Zionism is Racism resolution in the United Nations decades later. This began in the mid-1960s with a series of proposals. By 1975, the Arab League, a group comprising Arab countries, and the Soviet Union submitted a proposal that became United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, in which Zionism was equated with racism. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations was Chaim Herzog. He was the father of today's President Isaac Herzog and the son of Chief Rabbi Yitzhak Herzog. It was Rabbi Herzog who helped bring Techelet back to the seat. I discussed him on my podcast on that issue, which you can check out at benbresky.substack.com. Listen to what Ambassador Herzog had to say during the UN vote in 1975, especially at the end where he tears the paper in half.
For Zionism is nothing more and nothing less than the Jewish people's sense of origin and destination in the land linked eternally with his name. It is also the instrument whereby the Jewish nation seeks an authentic fulfillment of itself. And the drama enacted in the region, in which the Arab nation has realized its sovereignty in 20 states, comprising 100 million people in 4.5 square million miles with vast resources, The issue, therefore, is not whether the world will come to terms with Arab nationalism. The question is at what point Arab nationalism, with its prodigious glut of advantage, wealth and opportunity, will come to terms with the modest but equal rights of another Middle Eastern nation to pursue its life in security and peace. The vicious diatribes on Zionism voiced here by Arab delegates may give this assembly the wrong impression that while the rest of the world supported the Jewish national liberation movement, the Arab world was always hostile to Zionism. This is not the case. Arab leaders, cognizant of the rights of the Jewish people, fully endorsed the virtues of Zionism. Sharif Hussein, the leader of the Arab world during the First World War, welcomed the return of the Jews to Palestine. His son, Emir Faisal, who represented the Arab world in the Paris Peace Conference, had this to say about Zionism on the 3rd of March 1919, and I quote, "We Arabs, especially the educated amongst us, look with deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We will wish the Jews a hearty welcome home. We are working together for a reformed and revised Near East, and with our two movements complement one another. The movement is national and not imperialistic. There is room in Syria for us both. Indeed, I think that neither can be a success without the other," unquote. It is perhaps pertinent at this point to recall that in 1947, when the question of Palestine was being debated in the United Nations, the Soviet Union strongly supported the Jewish independence struggle. Show me another pluralistic society in this world in which, despite all the difficult problems under which we live, Jew and Arab live together with such a degree of harmony, in which the dignity and rights of man are observed before the law, in which no death sentence is applied, in which freedom of speech, of movement, of thought, of expression are guaranteed. The Arab delegates talk of racism. It lies not in their mouths. What has happened to the 800,000 Jews who lived for over 2,000 years in the Arab lands, who formed some of the most ancient communities long before the advent of Islam? Where are those communities? What happened to the people? What happened to their property? The Jews were once one of the most important communities in the countries of the Middle East, the leaders of thought, of commerce, of medical science. Where are they in Arab society today? You dare talk of racism when I can point with pride to the Arab ministers who have served in my government, to the Arab deputy speaker of my parliament, to Arab officers and men serving of their own volition in our defense, border and police forces, to the hundreds of thousands of Arabs from all over the Middle East crowding the cities of Israel every year, to the thousands of Arabs from all over the Middle East coming for medical treatment to Israel, to the fact that it is as natural for an Arab to serve in public office in Israel as it is incongruous to think of a Jew serving in any public office in any Arab country, indeed being admitted to many of them. Is that racism? It is not. That, Mr. President, is Zionism. It is our attempt to build a society, imperfect though it may be, and what society is perfect, in which the visions of the prophets of Israel will be realized. I know that we have problems. I know that many disagree with our government's policies. Many in Israel, too, disagree from time to time with the government's policies, and are free to do so because Zionism has created the first and only real democratic state in a part of the world that never really knew democracy and freedom of speech. For us, the Jewish people, this is but a passing episode in a rich and event-filled history. We put our trust in our providence, in our faith and beliefs, in our time-hallowed tradition, in our striving for social advance and human values, and in our people wherever they may be. For us, the Jewish people, this resolution based on hatred, falsehood and arrogance is devoid of any moral or legal value. For us, the Jewish people, This is no more than a piece of paper, and we shall treat it as such. Thank you, Mr. President.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan was the United States ambassador to the United Nations. He was born to an Irish Catholic family and raised in a working-class neighborhood in New York. A Democrat, he worked with John F. Kennedy and served as a senator. Some consider his speech at the UN to be a key moment in his political career.
What we have here is a lie. A political lie of a variety well known to the 20th century and scarcely exceeded in all that annal of untruth and outrage. The lie is that Zionism is a form of racism. The overwhelmingly clear truth is that it is not. The word racism is a creation of the English language and relatively new to it. Racism, as defined by Webster's Third New International Dictionary, is, and I quote, the assumption that traits and capacities are determined by biological race, and that races differ decisively from one another, unquote. It further involves, quote, a belief in the inherent superiority of a particular race and its right to domination over others, again, unquote. This meaning is clear. It is equally clear that this assumption, this belief, has always been altogether alien to the political and religious movement known as Zionism. It defined its members not in terms of birth, but of belief. That is to say, it was not a movement of the Irish to free Ireland, or of the Polish to free Poland, not a movement of Algerians to free Algeria, nor of Indians to free India. It was not a movement of persons connected by historic membership in a genetic pool of, say, the Chinese people, nor yet of diverse groups occupying the same territory, which enables us to speak of the American people with no greater indignity to truth. To the contrary, Zionists defined themselves merely as Jews and declared to be Jewish anyone born of a Jewish mother or, and this is the absolutely crucial fact, anyone who converted to Judaism, which is to say, in the terms of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, adopted by the 20th General Assembly, anyone regardless of, quote, race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. The State of Israel, which in time was the creation of the Zionist movement, has been extraordinary for nothing so much as the range of what are called sometimes racial stocks from which it has drawn its citizenry. There are black Jews, brown Jews, white Jews, Jews from the Orient, and Jews from the West. Most such persons could be said to have been born Jews, just as most Presbyterians and most Hindus are born to their faith. But there are many Jews who are converts. In the meantime, the population of Israel also includes large numbers of non-Jews, among them Arabs, both of the Muslim and Christian religions, and of Christians and others of national origins. Many of these persons are citizens of Israel, and those who are not can become citizens by legal procedures very much like those which obtain in a typical nation of Western Europe. I am here making one point, and one point only, which is whatever else Zionism may be, it is not and cannot be a form of racism. The State of Israel could not be and could not become racist unless it ceased to be Zionist. Indeed, the idea that the Jews are a race, quote unquote, was invented not by Jews but by those who hated Jews. The terrible lie that has been told here today will have terrible consequences. Not only will people begin to say, indeed they have already begun to say, that the United Nations is a place where lies are told, but far more serious, grave, and perhaps irreparable harm will be done to the cause of human rights. The harm will arise first because it will strip from racism the precise and abhorrent meaning that it still precariously holds today. How will peoples of the world feel about racism and about the need to struggle against it when they are told that it is an idea so broad as to include the Jewish national liberation movement? Today we have drained the word racism of its meaning. Tomorrow, terms like national self-determination and national honor will be perverted in the same way to serve the purposes of conquest and exploitation. The United States of America declares that it does not acknowledge, it will not abide by, it will never acquiesce in this infamous act. Thank you, Mr. President.
16 years later, the Soviet Union had broken up, and there was a push for Israel to enter negotiations with its neighbors. This is United States President George Bush speaking at the United Nations in 1991.
UNGA Resolution 3379, the so-called Zionism is Racism resolution, mocks this pledge and the principles upon which the United Nations was founded. And I call now for its repeal. Zionism is not a policy. It is the idea that led to the creation of a home for the Jewish people to the State of Israel. And to equate Zionism with the intolerable sin of racism is to twist history and forget the terrible plight of Jews in World War II and indeed throughout history. To equate Zionism with racism is to reject Israel itself, a member of good standing of the United Nations. This body cannot claim to seek peace and at the same time challenge Israel's right to exist. By repealing this resolution, unconditionally, the United Nations will enhance its credibility and serve the cause of peace.
Thus, the Zionism is Racism resolution was rescinded with a vote in the UN General Assembly. However, the former United Nations Street continues to retain its name, Zionism Street. This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments and past shows, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, and Shalom.